Hey, you're listening to the Matt Uyeno podcast. As always, super excited to be here. And I want to start this off with a question. Oopsie. I want to start this off with a question. Have you ever talked to someone who you don't really know that well, or even somebody that you do know? And you give them a little bit of your day, a little time out of your day, and they end up telling you their entire life story, or they go into this super long monologue or whatever particular topic you're talking about. And I'm sure you've been in a position where they keep talking and talking and talking and talking, where after a certain point, it's just frankly hard to care about what they're saying anymore because it just keeps going on and on and on. And recently I've had the pleasure of talking to a couple of individuals who are like this, where I don't really know them that well. But again, there's this one guy who was, well, yeah, anyway, he was just telling me it just went from subject to subject with no really like pause in between, but it was a long monologue, let me tell you. And I was just thinking, I can't help but to not care after a certain point, to just be bored, like when somebody just keep talking, when it's not really a dialogue, it's just kind of a monologue. And that kind of inspired this podcast today, because I was thinking like, man, I've been guilty of this too, where I, kind of just go on these long tangents with people who I know, mostly with people I know. And sometimes I go a little bit too long on these tangents. And so I'm guilty of this as well. And I was thinking, for the people that I was talking to who are giving me the long monologue and everything, I want people to care about what they have to say. And for those of you who are listening or watching this podcast, I want people to care about what you have to say. So this podcast is kind of what's been going through my head about how to make or how to treat your voice as if it's something worth listening to. And this podcast is going to kind of cover a couple different angles. One is going to be how to make your word actually valuable. And two, how to kind of communicate that value interpersonally, because you can have, let's say, the objectively the best advice in the world, but if you're not able to communicate that value or that advice or whatever in the correct context, in the right way, then it's the value is not going to be communicated well. So again, the goal of this podcast is for you to be able to walk away knowing how to not treat your voice as a cheap commodity. That's the goal here, is to treat your voice like something that has value. And that's what I'm going to go over today. So like I said, with these individuals that I was talking to, I just remember one guy, he showed me a video, and this video was like 15 minutes long, and he just kind of stood there with the video just showing it to me. And you normally and I was intrigued at first, but I don't know, when somebody is just showing you a video for that's like a 15-minute long video, it's just it's just kind of hard to stay engaged with that. But I've also thought about in my life the times where someone has given me the time of day and I have kind of overstayed my welcome, so to speak. I just, yeah, I'm guilty. You know what? I might as well rename or rebrand this podcast to all the things that Matt is guilty of and how to avoid it yourself. But in order to make your voice something that is of value, one of the first things you need to understand is supply and demand. Just like in economics and business or whatever, generally speaking, if there's a super huge surplus or a big supply of things, the demand is a little lower. Therefore, the price is a little cheaper. Now, I'm not trying to say that free speech is bad. What I am trying to say here is that if you constantly just talk and, if you just talk and talk and talk and talk, because there's a huge supply of your voice, of your thoughts and opinions, generally speaking, there's going to be less of a demand for it. My good friend Mitch, he's a quiet dude. He's a more introverted, quiet dude, but he's very smart, very thoughtful. And one thing that I've noticed time and time again within the conversations with my friend groups is that he often sits on the side and kind of just observes the conversation. Usually he's playing video games or something, but I've witnessed this multiple times where he's not saying anything, he's just listening. And somebody inevitably goes, "Hey Mitch, what do you think?" Now, what do you think happens when somebody asks for an opinion? Normally, if you ask for an opinion, you listen to it. Contrast that with somebody who just butts in and just starts talking and talking about what they think about the situation. You want to get to the point where people are asking for what you think, because I think generally speaking, it's a good rule to save your voice for those who are going to value it, who are going to respect your voice. Now, this, and practically speaking, that just means holding your tongue a little bit. That means resisting the urge to give your entire thesis, your doctoral thesis on whatever it is you guys are talking about. Now, obviously, I'm not saying like if you're talking with your friends that you deliberately be extra quiet to the point of awkwardness. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you want to be in a position where what you have to say is so attractive that you don't need to butt in, that people ask for it. Because again, you don't want to just give out the value and knowledge that you have to people who aren't going to respect it. Generally speaking, you don't want to give anything away of yourself that people aren't going to value. That includes your time, that includes your emotional vulnerability, that includes your finances. Generally speaking, again, you want to save those things for those who are going to value it. Now, I'm not saying to be, to hoard everything and to just be overly stingy. That's not what I'm saying, because there is a time and place to give what you have to those people who may not even know that was from you, like charitable giving. There is a time and place. But for the context of this podcast, I want you guys to walk away. I want you guys to be the type of people where people will ask you for, and not just advice, like opinions and perspectives, perspectives on things. And part of that is staying in your lane. Meaning it's very, very, there's this thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's very, very important. And I've been a huge, huge perpetrator of this. Meaning the Dunning-Kruger effect basically just means if you know nothing about a subject, then you're not going to be very confident about that subject. Makes sense, right? Dunning-Kruger effect explains the relationship between how much you know and how confident you are about a subject matter. So generally speaking, what ends up happening is if you have no knowledge about something, generally speaking, you have no confidence speaking about that subject. Like, I know nothing about astrophysics, therefore I have no confidence in it. But what's interesting, let's say you read a book, or you watch a documentary or a podcast or something about any topic. According to the Dunning-Kruger effect, an individual who starts to learn about something and has a decent grasp on the subject matter will have a very, very high confidence level in their knowledge. So let's say, again, I'm talking about astrophysics, and I read a book about astrophysics, and now I feel so smart about it. And then I talk like I'm an expert. We've all kind of, I think we've all kind of been there, and we've kind of talked to people who they read one book, they watch one documentary, and suddenly they talk like they're an expert at the subject matter. And again, I am very, very guilty of this as well. But as you start to learn more, you start to understand that you don't know as much as you thought you knew. And therefore, confidence actually takes a dip the more you learn about a subject, which is interesting. And then after it takes that dip, the more you learn, the amount of confidence you have slowly starts to go up again. So again, the Dunning-Kruger effect is when you start to learn a little bit of a subject matter, confidence spikes, goes super high. As you learn more, you realize, oh wait, maybe I don't know as much about it. And then as you learn more, the confidence slowly comes back. Now, it's very, very important. Now, I'm mostly talking to myself at this point, but it's very important, Matt, that you realize that just because you've read a couple books on a subject matter doesn't make you an expert at it. And generally speaking, you should just shut up when it comes to that topic. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to shut up completely. For me personally, what I try to do is I try to preface with, hey, I don't know super a lot about this subject, but from what I've read, it seems like this, and that. And you take a little bit of a more humble approach to it. Because look, nobody wants to talk to someone who thinks they know it all. So that's the other thing too. It's staying in your lane and understanding the Dunning-Kruger effect. The other thing is positioning. Position yourself for your opinion to matter. Because here's the hard truth: is that just because you have an opinion doesn't mean it matters. Doesn't mean it's good. And let me just emphasize, it does not mean it matters. Because I think we confuse our right to have an opinion with having our opinion, or having the right for our opinion to matter. It's not the same thing. Go ahead, have any opinion you want, but that doesn't mean it's a good one. And perhaps the greatest example of this, or the way that I've learned about this, is being in a leadership position. Because one thing I've learned about being a leader in rugby is that about rugby leadership, but like leadership in general, is that as someone who is not the leader, it is very easy to look at a couple problems that the leader is doing, or some things that the leader isn't doing particularly well. It's easy to look at that, say, oh, he's a bad leader, she's a bad leader, because he or she is not addressing these pinpointed issues that I think are important. But what that person doesn't realize is a leader has so much on their plate, and literally the complaints that you have are just the tip of the iceberg of what that leader is doing. They're doing a million different things, and you think they're a bad leader because they're not catering to the one or two specific problems that you think are of the utmost importance. Now, that doesn't excuse leaders, and I'm not saying that just because you're a leader, you're automatically a good one. But the perspective here is that if you want your opinion to matter, you should be in a position where your opinion matters. For example, if you are in an organization, a club, anything, if you have something to complain about, then step up and put yourself in a position to change it. Otherwise, shut up. Just straight up, shut up. Because like, I've seen it so many times where people, all they want to do is complain. And then when they have an opportunity to do something about it, they shrivel up, they step back, and they don't do anything about it. When people do that, it makes me lose massive respect for them, because it's like, okay, you can identify the problem, but you're not willing to be a part of the solution. And my general rule is that if you are not willing to contribute to the solution, then shut up about the problem. Like, straight up. That doesn't mean you can't necessarily talk about it, but just don't complain about it as if it's a big deal to you. So how does that tie into having your opinion matter? See, as somebody who may be a subordinate to a leader or an organization or anything like that, you need to understand that in order for your opinion to matter, you need to put yourself in a position for that opinion to do something. And so basically that just means if you are the president, if you are the leader of whatever thing it is, your opinion will actually matter more. And so it's kind of like a long-term game where you want to, again, be in a position where your opinion matters. And just like, generally speaking, a married person should be taken more seriously when it comes to marriage advice than a person who has never been married in their entire life. Because the married people, they're positioned as a married couple, therefore their opinion about marriage means more, generally speaking. That doesn't mean the single person's advice or opinion is wrong, but again, it's about positioning. You want to be in a good position. So again, if you have an opinion about something, unless you're willing to do something, unless you're trying to be a part of the solution, just shut up. Just don't talk about it. The other thing too is having good listening skills and digging deep. One thing that I've learned from my experience in sales is that in order for sales to be ethical, in order for it to be moral, and for it to be even just more effective, you need to understand exactly where your prospect is coming from and understanding if they even can benefit from whatever it is you're selling. And at the same time, this doesn't just apply to sales, this applies to your interpersonal relationships as well. Because just because your friend or family has a problem, that doesn't mean your advice is the right solution to that problem. And how are you going to know? Well, it's if you dig deep and ask questions. That's because I think a lot of us, again, myself included, tend to hear a problem that somebody is going through and immediately think we have the right solution or the mindset or advice to help solve that problem without digging deep, without truly understanding. Because look, the worst thing you can do is sit through someone's lecture when you don't feel like that person understands where you're coming from. It's like when you ask a professor a question and they go on this huge monologue and they don't even answer your question. And at the end they ask, does that help your question? And you just kind of say, yeah, it does, even though it really doesn't. And so some of the professors are just like people that I've really appreciated talking to are the people who have taken the time to really understand, because people will generally speaking respect your opinion more if they can respect where you're coming from, when they can respect how you got to that opinion. So for example, in the sales process, again, like as someone who is selling something, you need to be doing 20% of the talking and your prospect should be doing 80% of the talking. As a salesperson, you're not going in there and you're just pitching right away. Because again, if you're pushing a product that you are not fully confident is good for that person, that's where I draw the ethical moral line. And so you need to be able to ask questions and fully understand. So for your interpersonal relationships or sales or negotiation or whatever, understand like where they're coming from, understand where they're trying to go, understand their underlying motivations for things. Because, a story that I like to tell often is about my friend Steven, who, we, after 3, 4, 5, maybe not 5, but very long conversations, we've come to very just honest and frank conclusions that we've said to each other. Like, for example, I told Steven one time that I think he's deal-breakingly selfish and needy, and therefore he should not be in his current relationship or something. I turned out to be wrong. I wasn't as he wasn't deal-breakingly selfish and needy as much as I said he was. And there was this other conversation where he told me, he's like, "You're a bad businessman, and I wouldn't invest in you," and that hurt. That kept me up at night. But it was a very non-personal hurt, and I respected his words because I completely respected how those words came about. Now, a big theme about all of this is just being more strategic and more thoughtful for what you say, when you say it, and how you say it. Because again, you want to save you want to save you for people who are going to value you. And again, this doesn't just apply to your words. It applies to your finances, your emotional intimacy, your time, all of that good stuff. Save it for people who will value it. And don't treat your life as some cheap commodity that is to be handed out for free. Now, I want to make it clear that I am not against being generous. I'm not against giving your resources to people who need it, even if they will never know it was you who gave it. But there is a fine line. There's a fine line between charitable giving and just giving things away because you need to stroke your ego, because you're trying to show everybody how smart you are or how rich you are or things like that. Because ironically, the harder you try to put up this image, the harder you try to posture up, generally speaking, people can see through that. And being able to posture up and hold this image of yourself, that's not necessarily a good skill to have. Because if you're really good at posturing up this image that isn't true, you're just becoming good at lying, basically. So part of having an opinion, perspective, and advice that people respect is to just be genuine, just be honest, and honestly care about where they're coming from, and honestly investigate or understand their situation before you even open your mouth. But yeah, that's all I got for today. Hope this helped you. I hope that you can take this podcast, this episode, and make your word more valuable. But just to recap, be aware of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Just because you read a book, watched a documentary, or talk to an expert, that doesn't make you an expert. Be intellectually humble. Number 2 is positioning. If you're going to have a complaint or something or an opinion, put yourself in a position to be a part of the solution. And the long-term game is to be in a position where you are successful, where you are actually, not if you think, if you're actually competent at the things you are talking about. The other, number 3, is having good learning and listening and digging deep skills. Understand where somebody is coming from truly before you try to give your advice. And the overall message I want you to take away is don't treat your speech, don't treat your thoughts as a cheap, common commodity. Make it more valuable. Make it more valuable by your positioning, your listening skills, saving it for those who will value it. Staying in your lane. All of these things can help you to develop a more respectable position for your words to be taken seriously. So I hope you like this podcast. Catch you on the next one. Go win.